When you think of modern warfare, what comes to mind?
Usually something highly technical, right?
Right. You probably picture satellite intelligence, cyber attacks, incredibly complex geopolitics, maybe drone swarms.
Yeah, the high-tech stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what if I told you that the fuel for one of the world's most devastating current conflicts is actually something much, much older?
It really is wild.
It is. What if the driving force is essentially a modern-day gold rush?
You know, it sounds like something out of a completely different century, honestly, but it is the grim reality of what is happening right now.
Yeah.
We are seeing the highly sophisticated mechanisms of global finance collide with one of the oldest, most primal resources on Earth.
Which brings us perfectly to our mission for this deep dive. We are setting out to understand one core question. What is driving Sudan's war?
And to figure this out, we've gathered a massive stack of research.
Huge. We're looking at comprehensive geopolitical analyses from Chatham House, investigations by the UN, data from the NGO SwissEd.
There's also that incredibly detailed academic case study on gold supply chains.
Right. Plus, extensive humanitarian data tracking the reality on the ground.
Yeah.
So for you listening, we want to set the expectation right now. This isn't just a simple breakdown of battles or moving troops on a map.
No, not at all.
We're exploring how a localized power struggle transforms into a transnational conflict ecosystem, a place where gold, global finance, and regional powers all violently intersect.
And it is important to state right up front that we are looking at this through a purely analytical, historically grounded lens.
Always.
Our goal is to synthesize the information provided in these sources impartially. We aren't here to advocate for a specific side or endorse any political viewpoints.
Right, we are simply unpacking the research to understand the mechanics of this conflict. Okay, let's unpack this.
To understand how Sudan got trapped in this gold-fueled war, we really have to look back at the country's recent history.
And it starts with a pretty paranoid but highly calculated strategy used by former President Omar al-Bashir.
Yes, the historical context here is absolutely crucial. For 30 years, al-Bashir maintained his grip on power through a strategy known as coup-proofing.
Coup-proofing?
Exactly. Think about how a standard government operates. It usually has a unified national army. But al-Bashir knew that a strong, unified Sudanese Armed Forces, or the SF, could eventually overthrow him.
So he needed a counterweight.
Precisely. To keep the army in check, he actively armed and empowered rival paramilitary groups to serve as that counterweight.
It's essentially dividing and conquering your own military.
That is exactly what it is. The most notorious of these groups were the Arab militias in Darfur known as the Janjaweed.
Right, who were used to ruthlessly suppress rebellions in the early 2000s.
Yeah, and in 2013, al-Bashir took it a step further. He formalized these militias into an official state-sponsored security apparatus called the Rapid Support Forces.
The RSF.
The RSF, and he placed them under the command of Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, who is widely known as Hemeti.
Okay, so while all this intricate political maneuvering and coup-proofing was happening, Sudan underwent a massive structural economic shock.
A total paradigm shift.
Right. In 2011, South Sudan officially seceded. Now, for you listening, I want you to imagine your business or your household losing 90% of its revenue, literally overnight.
It's unfathomable.
But that is exactly what happened to Sudan's oil revenue. The country experienced a severe economic crisis and essentially had to pivot hard to the next most valuable thing in the ground.
Which was gold.
Which was gold.
And that pivot changed everything, leading us directly to a major historical turning point in 2017.
The Jebel Amer mines.
Yes. As the gold rush accelerated, the RSF, acting on al-Bashir's orders, seized control of the highly lucrative Jebel Emer gold mines in North Darfur from a former militia leader.
And the sources show this wasn't just a military victory.
No, it was a complete economic paradigm shift. We actually have a direct quote from Hemeti in the research that captures this perfectly.
Let's hear it.
He said, "I'm not the first man to have gold mines. There's nothing preventing us from working in gold."
I found that quote so revealing when I read it.
It really is.
It completely normalizes the idea of a military general acting as a private mining baron. Our sources detail how this specific event allowed the RSF to build what economists call an enclave economy.
An economy within an economy.
Right. Through corporate fronts controlled by Hemeti's family, the RSF became entirely financially independent from the Sudanese state.
They were a state-sponsored militia that no longer needed the state's money to pay their troops or buy weapons.
They were entirely self-funded.
And if you look at the strategic drivers, when you have two heavily armed forces, the official army the SAF and the paramilitary, the RSF.
Both competing for the same finite resources.
Exactly. And neither fully controlling the other. The friction is bound to ignite. Al-Bashir had managed to balance them for a while by offering lucrative mining partnerships to both sides.
But then came 2019.
Right. A popular uprising ousted him, and that precarious balance collapsed entirely. The economic competition for supremacy paved the direct path to the violence we see today.
And that brings us to April 2023, when the war officially broke out. But before we get into the geopolitical chessboard, we really need to ground this in the human reality.
We do.
Because the humanitarian data we are looking at is just devastating. Since the fighting started, nearly 25 million people in Sudan require humanitarian assistance.
25 million.
To put that in perspective for you, that is roughly half the country's population requiring emergency aid just to survive.
The displacement numbers are equally staggering. Nearly 12 million people have been forced from their homes.
That's 12 million.
We are looking at one of the largest internal displacement crises in recent global history. The healthcare system has almost entirely collapsed, with roughly 80% of healthcare facilities shut down.
Which leads to secondary crises.
Exactly. Massive populations are facing severe outbreaks of cholera and malaria. And in regions like North Darfur, the situation has officially deteriorated into outright famine.
It's horrific. But while the international community was watching the military clashes and the humanitarian disaster unfold in cities like Khartoum, there was a parallel war happening beneath the surface.
It's an economic war.
Right. The RSF wasn't just taking territory to hold ground, they were actively hunting for capital.
What's fascinating here is how the underlying mechanics of this war entirely dictate the military strategy on the ground. Both the SF and the RSF need immediate liquid capital.
They can't just issue war bonds.
No, they can't rely on long-term government bonds or state taxes to fund this fight. They need hard currency right now to buy weapons, fuel, and supplies. And gold is the ultimate, universally accepted liquid asset.
The details and the research about how this scramble for gold played out in the early days of the war are almost cinematic.
In a terrifying way.
Yes. On May 24th, 2023, the RSF captured the Sudan gold refinery in Khartoum. According to officials, they seized an estimated 1.3 to 1.6 tons of gold.
Which is an immense amount of wealth.
We're talking about roughly $150.5 million worth of gold gone in an instant. And it didn't stop at industrial targets.
Oh, the home invasion.
Yes. There are reports of RSF soldiers using literal handheld gold detectors to sweep through private homes and bank vaults in Khartoum, systematically looting the life savings and jewelry of civilian families.
That specific detail about the gold detectors is incredibly revealing, isn't it? It shows a highly coordinated, premeditated effort to extract wealth at every single level of society.
It really does.
This wasn't random, chaotic looting by undisciplined soldiers. It was a systematic harvesting of capital to feed a massive war machine.
I can't even imagine sitting in your living room and having soldiers sweep your walls for your savings. It's horrifying.
Truly.
So we have this massive, ruthless extraction of wealth. But how does raw gold turn into military-grade weapons?
Oh, this is where the geopolitical analysis in our sources really maps things out.
Right, because the war has effectively split Sudan into a two-state gold economy.
Geographically, the country is fractured into two distinct supply chains now. The Sudanese Armed Forces, the SAF, generally control the east and the north.
Where the big mines are.
Yes. This area contains the more established industrial mining operations, along with widespread artisanal mining. On the other side, the RSF controls the west.
Primarily the Darfur region.
Exactly. And there, the gold extraction is predominantly artisanal, meaning it's largely done by hand by local civilian miners, whom the RSF either taxes heavily or extorts directly.
Okay, let's trace the SAF's network first. How is the official army funding its side of the war?
The data points heavily toward Egypt.
Right. This SAF currently controls the de facto government out of Port Sudan, and they rely on Egypt for political backing, basic foodstuffs, and crucial military alliances.
But the economic relationship with Egypt is incredibly complex. The ISAF leadership technically wants to regulate the gold trade to maximize state revenues through official taxes.
Which makes sense for a state government.
It does. However, because the military leaders need immediate cash for the war economy, up to 80% of the gold mined from SAF-controlled areas is actually smuggled across the Egyptian border.
By their own people.
By the very people who are supposed to be regulating it, simply to avoid those state taxes.
That is wild. They're smuggling their own gold to bypass their own state apparatus.
Yeah. The smugglers sell the gold in Egypt and use the profits to buy essential goods, chemicals for mining, and weapons, which are then sent back across the border into Sudan.
And what kind of weapons are they getting?
Through these networks, the ASAF has been able to secure advanced weaponry, such as Iranian Mohajer-6 drones.
Which the sources say have been critical in their recent offensives.
Absolutely critical.
And then you look at the RSF's network, and it's a completely different map. Because they control the West, their gold is smuggled out through neighboring countries like Chad, Libya, and South Sudan.
The UN data details how the RSF uses a specific airstrip in Amjaras, Chad, to move supplies.
But the most alarming connection in the RSF network has to be their partnership with Russia.
This is a critical piece of the global geopolitical puzzle. The RSF has deep established ties with Russia's Africa Corps.
Which most people know by its former name, the Wagner Group.
Right, the Wagner Group. The Africa Corps operates across the Sahel and Central Africa, partnering with local militias to extract raw resources. And the scale is massive. The sources indicate that the Kremlin has earned over $2.5 billion since 2022 from African gold, and that money is directly funding Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine.
That is a staggering connection. A localized war in Africa is directly subsidizing a massive land war in Europe.
It shows how interconnected these shadow economies really are.
So the Russian mercenaries provide security and logistical smuggling routes for the RSF's gold. What does the RSF get in return?
They get high-end, heavy weaponry. The reports specifically mention shipments of man-pads, which are portable surface-to-air missiles flowing through Libya to the RSF.
Facilitated by these Russian networks.
Facilitated by the Russian networks and allied Libyan commanders. It is a direct, frictionless exchange of raw, extracted wealth for advanced military capability.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because whether the gold is mined by the SF in the north and smuggled through Egypt, or mined by the RSF in Darfur and smuggled through Chad or Libya,
almost all of it ultimately ends up in the exact same place.
The United Arab Emirates.
Yes. The UAE, and specifically Dubai, serves as the ultimate clearinghouse for this conflict commodity.
So despite the bitter, bloody rivalry between the SF and the RSF on the ground,
both are entirely dependent on the UAE's financial infrastructure to convert their raw gold into the hard currency they need to survive.
The numbers from the NGO Swiss Aid are just jaw-dropping. Let me pull this up.
Yeah.
In 2024 alone, the UAE imported 1,392 tons of gold.
A huge amount.
The total value of that, $105.4 billion.
Billion with a B.
And the data shows this gold flows into Dubai directly from Sudan, or it transits through these third-party countries we mentioned, like Egypt, or even places like Uganda and Togo.
To truly understand how this works, we need to look at the classic mechanics of money laundering,
Right.
which the academic case study we reviewed outlines perfectly. It involves 3 distinct stages: placement, layering, and integration.
Walk us through this. Imagine you're a smuggler with a bag of conflict gold. How do you actually get it through those 3 stages?
Let's start with placement. Transporting gold into the UAE is surprisingly easy due to specific loopholes in their legislation for hand-carried gold.
Hand-carried.
Yes, a smuggler can literally pack millions of dollars worth of gold into their carry-on luggage, fly commercially into Dubai, and just declare it at customs.
I have to pause you there because that is absurd.
I know.
I mean, I get aggressively patted down by airport security if I forget to take a half-empty bottle of water out of my backpack. And these guys are tossing duffel bags of unregulated gold into the overhead bin.
It sounds like a joke, but it's standard operating procedure. Even if the smuggler doesn't have the proper export paperwork from Sudan or Chad to prove where the gold came from.
Which they wouldn't.
Right. The penalty at the airport is often just a minor fine. They pay the fine in cash, and suddenly that gold is legally placed inside the UAE.
Incredible. Okay, so the gold has cleared customs. That's placement. What is layering?
Layering is where you obscure the origins. The smuggler takes that newly imported gold to the Dubai gold souk. There, they can easily obtain false certificates of origin, claiming the gold came from somewhere legitimate.
Then they sell it.
Exactly. They
Okay.
sell it to a local trader, who then sells it to a massive refinery. The sources specifically named Kalodi, a major UAE refiner, as having historically received massive amounts of gold linked directly to the RSF.
So it goes to the refinery.
Once that raw gold goes into the furnace, is melted down and refined into bullion, its chemical signature is gone. It becomes utterly untraceable.
Wow.
You literally cannot distinguish it from gold mined in Canada or Australia.
And that brings us to the final step, integration.
Right. Now that the refinery has melted and reformed the gold, it enters the global licit market. The refiners in the UAE sell it to certified, reputable partners around the world.
The Swiss connection.
Yes. The case study notes that Collodi has traded with Valcombi, which is a massive gold refiner in Switzerland, and Valcombi is LBMA certified.
Just to clarify for anyone unfamiliar, LBMA stands for the London Bullion Market Association.
Correct.
Getting their certification is basically the global gold standard, no pun intended, that guarantees to buyers that a piece of gold is ethically sourced and completely clean.
Exactly. Once that conflict gold mixes with clean gold and gets that LBMA certification in Switzerland, it has been completely integrated.
The blood is officially washed off.
It goes into the global supply chain, ending up in our smartphones, our laptops, our jewelry.
And the money.
The clean, hard cash paid by those Swiss refiners flows back to Dubai and eventually back into the war chests of the militias fighting in the streets of Khartoum.
It is a perfectly functioning, frictionless machine. But I have a major question here, because looking at the geopolitical analysis from Chatham House, there is a glaring regional paradox.
The Egypt and UAE dynamic.
Yes, if we look at the major power players, Egypt and the UAE, they are close geopolitical allies. The UAE literally just invested $35 billion into the Egyptian economy to bail them out of a crisis.
They are very closely tied.
So why on earth would the UAE risk that massive strategic relationship by funding a proxy war against Egypt's chosen ally in Sudan?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it makes sense when you look at their divergent long-term strategic interests. The UAE is looking far into the future. They are focused on Red Sea coastline access and global agricultural security. They actually own hundreds of thousands of acres of Sudanese farmland.
Ah, okay.
They want a pliant, transactional partner who will secure those specific investments without bureaucratic red tape, and they've bet heavily on Hemedti and the RSF to provide that.
And Egypt has completely different priorities.
Exactly. Egypt shares a massive, highly porous southern border with Sudan. They aren't looking for venture capital opportunities. They are terrified of regional instability, refugee crises, and the potential rise of hardline Islamists taking over a fractured state.
Right, security is their main concern.
So they back the SSF, viewing the official military as the only traditional, legitimate state power capable of maintaining order.
And this actually ties perfectly into the broader theme we've been exploring in our ongoing geopolitical series. For those of you who've been following our previous deep dives on the shifting global order, we've talked extensively about how we are moving rapidly into a multipolar world.
It's a massive shift.
Traditional superpowers, like the United States or European nations, have stepped back from certain regions. And in their place, middle power hegemons like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and regional players like Egypt are aggressively stepping in to fill the void and act as primary power brokers.
Sudan is a textbook example of this new reality.
It really is. And it means the old ways of solving these conflicts just don't work anymore.
That is the core policy challenge identified by the Chatham House researchers. The traditional Western diplomatic playbook of simply sanctioning individual generals or issuing stern UN condemnations won't work here.
Because the illicit networks are entirely decentralized.
Exactly. Individuals like Hemedti already operate completely outside the formal global banking system through these enclave economies and shadow supply chains.
So if traditional sanctions are useless against a system designed to evade them, what actually stops the war?
The research concludes that peace requires a fundamental shift in the economic incentives of these middle power regional actors.
The sponsors.
Yes. The international community has to somehow convince the UAE, Egypt, and others that a stable, unified Sudan is actually more profitable and secure for their long-term strategic goals than a fragmented, warring one.
Which is a tall order.
It is. Until the regional sponsors decide to stop buying the smuggled gold and stop sending the heavy weapons in return, the domestic conflict will continue to burn indefinitely.
So what does this all mean? When we step back and look at the entirety of the data, the war in Sudan isn't just a localized domestic political dispute or a random ethnic conflict.
Not at all.
It is a sprawling, highly efficient, globalized economic enterprise fueled by a voracious, seemingly endless hunger for gold.
And this raises an important question for all of us about the nature of modern commerce.
How so?
The globalized economic system, with its free trade zones, minimal customs barriers, and seamless instant financial transfers, was specifically designed by world governments to stimulate global wealth and reduce friction in international trade.
Right, to make business easier.
But this exact same system, the one that allows multinational corporations to thrive and deliver goods to our doorsteps, has inadvertently become the perfect, frictionless laundering machine for a devastating civil war.
It's a heavy realization. And it leaves you with a deeply provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up. We've spent this whole time talking about gold. But as the world aggressively pivots away from fossil fuels to combat climate change, our reliance on mined minerals is only going to skyrocket.
Absolutely.
Think about the copper, the lithium, the cobalt required for electric vehicle batteries, solar panels, and green energy grids. If the global financial system can so easily obscure the bloody origins of a prehistoric commodity like gold...
What happens with the next rush?
Exactly. What happens when the next devastating proxy war isn't fought over oil, but over the very green minerals we are relying on to save the planet? Will the same loopholes fund the conflicts of tomorrow?
It is definitely something to keep an eye on.
Something to keep in mind the next time you hear about the geopolitical race for resources. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.